Great to meet you, sir. I would wonder, Jack is his son. This way. Hey, sir, how you doing?
Thank you so much for coming.
Sir, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it.
This is such an important conversation. Out there.
Everybody.
We're doing this right through.
wanted to feel safe. Rest assured of all the harmony in the room.
I have my wallet and my lead down. Very solid.
Pros are the twos.
I want to thank everybody for being here today. It's not easy to bring everybody together, but everybody made the time to get together because of the importance of and the weight of the subject that we're dealing with here. And that is individuals that we know, that we chewed the same dirt as, that we know they themselves, their families are being hunted, and that have been betrayed, in my opinion. I want to read a statement that I've put a lot of thought into, kind of outlining my thoughts on this issue. I want to introduce you all, and then we want to hear from each and every one of you. And my colleague, Mr. Crow, here will be making a statement as well, I'm sure, as well as the rest of my colleagues here. But as chairman of the Oversight and Accountability Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs, I, along with the entire team, we did a lot to look at the events and the causes leading up to the American withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021. For today's roundtable on Taliban reprisals, we are focusing on the effect of that decision. Since the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Biden administration, in my opinion, they've been caught in a cycle of lies. And there's an old saying that where you tell one lie, you have to tell another one and another one and another one to keep covering up the lies that have been told, and you don't get out of that cycle. And I think that's the kind of situation that we're in right now, where there's a lie being told to cover up another, to cover up another, to cover up another. And you see this from President Biden's remarks. President Biden called the evacuation of Afghanistan an extraordinary success. We know that that was a lie. President Biden said that if there were American citizens left after August 31, then we're going to stay until we get them all out, unquote. We know that that was a lie. Secretary of State Blinken said that there were less than 200 Americans left in Afghanistan after the withdrawal, and closer to 100 if he was putting a fine point on it. We know that that was a lie. Foreign Affairs hearing in September of last year, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, said that she, quote, didn't believe that the administration had seen a consistent pattern of those Afghans who worked and supported our efforts in Afghanistan being murdered by the Taliban. That's a lie that to this moment is resulting in people fearing for their life. These are the facts. Banu Nagar, an Afghan police officer, was shot dead in front of her husband and children while she was 8 months pregnant. But the administration doesn't see a consistent pattern of those Afghans who worked and supported our efforts in Afghanistan being murdered by the Taliban. Mohammed Hashim, an Afghan police chief who had helped the United States, was tortured for 49 days and then was hanged to death. But the administration's not seeing the pattern. Haji Akazi, a government security official, surrendered since the Taliban had pledged amnesty. He was killed. But apparently there's no track record of these reprisal killings. Allah Halimi, a military officer, arrested in August with no charge. A week later, his family received his body without his head. but apparently no track record. 96% of SIV applicants were left behind. 70% of U.S. troops say that their interpreters did not make it out or they lost contact with them. The news cycle may move on and people will tell us to turn the page, but we can't turn the page because this chapter is still being written as we speak. To our friends and allies who were left in Afghanistan in August of 21, every day has been an abandonment and unfortunately broken promises. This wound is still bleeding for many of us. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, especially the veterans groups that have honored us by being a part of this discussion. The work that you all do is vital. I believe that to my core. You are valuable, your time is valuable, and your service has been invaluable. I thank you all for taking the time to come in and bring this subcommittee up to speed on what you have witnessed with your own eyes, your first-person perspective. And to those veterans who may be watching but cannot express their frustration because they're worried that they might be perceived as quote-unquote angry veterans, I would say that you're justified in your rage. And that makes all the difference in the world. This roundtable is not a group therapy to get over a war that is, to some, over. The war is clearly not over for the veterans who are fighting internal battles and for our allies who depend on us and were left behind. For them, they are living this battle still every single day in a very personal way. In fact, all Americans should be furious that our friends and their families were left behind. They should be furious at the administration who will go to extra lengths to cover up those lies. Because the lies that are still being told today are what are resulting in the day-to-day risk to life of those that served alongside of us. In that, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Mr. Crow, for an opening remark.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, for organizing this roundtable and pulling it together. Thank you for your friendship. The chairman and I are brothers in arms, having both served in Afghanistan, and I count him as a friend. Although we don't always agree on issues, we always try to find places where we can work together and find common cause. And this issue is near and dear to both of our hearts. Thank you to all of you for coming to this roundtable. I'm familiar with the work of many of your organizations, and you all have done just unbelievable work to keep the faith, to keep the promises, to protect our friends, our partners, our brothers, and our sisters, and I'm grateful for that. What I would like to do is to have a very productive conversation about the path forward, right? Because my criticisms of the manner of the withdrawal are well documented. And I don't need to tread that path again. That's not going to fix the problem. What we should do is focus on what are the solutions. How do we save those who need saving? How do we protect those who are being hunted down? It is well documented that there are reprisals, that people are being hunted down and tortured and killed, and these are our brothers and sisters who fought with us, who served with us at great personal expense, who, protected so many of us, right? Many of us would not be here today if it hadn't been for the service of our Afghan brothers and sisters who took that risk to stand shoulder to shoulder with us, and we have a lifetime responsibility, and until the day many of us die, we will be trying to fulfill that responsibility. So that's what I hope that this discussion is about, that we can talk about what is the path forward and not engage in accusations, not impugn folks with allegations of lies or deceptions, because that is not going to be productive. What will be is, what are the policy solutions? How can we get people to support the Afghan Adjustment Act? How can we get people to support the Afghan Allies Protection Act to streamline and expand the SIV program? There's legislation pending today that is designed to address this issue and expand the pipeline and streamline the pipeline. And I would encourage all members of the committee and all members of the Roundtable who have not yet signed on to these critical life-saving bills to do so immediately, to go to my staff behind me right now and say, put my name behind that effort that will help fulfill the promise. So with that, I look forward to the conversation today.
Before I introduce each member of our panel, would any of you like to be recognized for an opening statement?
I think I'd like to hear our folks. I've read the testimony already, but I'd like to personally have everybody speak, and then we can comment later.
Very good.
Chairman.
I'm going to introduce you all by profile in no particular order right now, and then we'll go down the line and give you all each the opportunity to speak. We'll start ladies first, and then we'll go from there. Very good. Amy Marden, Senior Advisor for Moral Compass Federation, a collaboration of veteran-led nonprofit organizations, also the founder and president of REACT DC, and the practice area lead for humanitarian operations at SOS International, and has been a Florida licensed attorney since 2010. Elizabeth Lynn, Director of Government Relations at Operation Recovery. Elizabeth. She is a decorated veteran of the U.S. Air Force and Navy Reserves, where her journey began with a mission to assist her and others, Afghan interpreters, in reaching safety. Elizabeth's role has evolved from coordination in Task Force Pineapple to leading financial operations significantly impacting global humanitarian efforts, and currently leads Operation Recovery's Afghanistan and Grow America Farm Corps initiatives. Elizabeth holds a bachelor's degree with business concentration, and we're proud to have you today. Justin Sapp. Colonel Justin Sapp is retiring from the Joint Staff after 30 years on active duty as an Army Special Forces officer shortly after 9/11. He was detailed to the Central Intelligence Agency and infiltrated Afghanistan with Team Alpha, one of the first CIA teams to go behind Taliban lines and support the Northern Alliance. Michael Sismar, former infantry captain, United States Marine Corps, and a Beirut vet. Retired special agent, FBI, with 29 years field experience working with fugitives, gangs, and drugs. Was also an FBI SWAT operator, sniper team leader for 2 FBI division SWAT teams. Thomas Kaza, am I saying that right? I am. I always look at it and mess it up, or want to mess it up. Thomas, a Green Beret, an executive director of the 1208 Foundation, the Long NGO advocating for National Mine Reduction Group, Afghans who cleared IEDs for special forces, over 15 years in uniform, Georgetown graduate. Joe Maida is a former Texas prosecutor who spent 6 years in Afghanistan. Helmand, Kandahar, Kabul, advancing rule of law, later served with U.S. Special Operations Command and Department of Treasury as a presidential appointee at the Pentagon, focusing on Afghanistan. Andrew Sullivan serves as the Director of Advocacy for No One Left Behind. No One Left Behind is the nation's oldest charitable organization devoted to helping special immigrant visa-eligible wartime allies from Iraq and Afghanistan evacuate and resettle in the United States. And in 2023, No One Left Behind assisted over 2,400 Afghans in escaping from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Sanjar Sohail is a publisher and founder of Hashti Sub Daily newspaper, the leading and biggest daily newspaper in Afghanistan with significant outreach throughout the country and outside Afghanistan. The newspaper has more than 2 million followers on Facebook, more than 500,000 followers on Twitter and Instagram. I want to thank you all for being here today. As I said, we're going to start with Amy, go to Elizabeth, and then we'll work our way down from Mr. Sullivan down here to Mr. Sohail. Very good.
Chairman Mast, respectfully, our community worked very hard to put a narrative together today that would be the most beneficial to further our conversation. If it's all right with you, sir, we would love to start on the other end and work our way down.
You all start however you want to start. Absolutely.
Thank you. Honorable members of the committee, my name is Sanjar Suhail, born and grown up in Afghanistan. I lived through numerous catastrophes during the war and atrocities of 80s and 90s. My best years and experience came from the 2 decades of the U.S.-supported democracy in Afghanistan. The U.S. intervention allowed me to the space and resources to study, became a journalist, and established the country's largest newspaper, HFAC Daily. We pioneered investigative journalism in Afghanistan and have produced impactful reports over the past 15 years. Today, it's my solemn honor to testify on the former Afghan National Security Forces, ANSF, situation following the withdrawal of U.S. troops. In the spring of 2022, HTSOB investigation detailing how the Taliban killed and tortured former Afghan forces and their family members shocked the world. My colleagues and I have been covering their pledge. I submit to this esteemed committee that the Taliban have been killing and torturing members of the former ANSF and their family members post-US withdrawal despite their commitments for amnesty. A copy of the report is attached to my testimony. Published in English by the New York Times, we documented the Taliban's 490 cases of killing and torture of former Afghan soldiers and officers who worked closely with their U.S. allies. Honorable committee members, this investigation only covered the first 6 months of the Taliban brutal treatment of the members of the former Afghanistan National Security Forces. As such, please treat the report as uncovering just the tip of the iceberg. Presently, in the face of grave danger, HTSO brave on-the-ground journalists document the Taliban atrocities. Still, we have observed an increase in the systematic killing, torturing of the former soldiers and officers of former Afghanistan Republic. Hundreds of Afghan soldiers and officers and their family members, including women and children, are being tortured, and some are killed in Taliban official and unofficial prisons. The tragic status of the former ANSF is not an isolated crisis. Millions of civilian women and men are also facing threats to their lives under the Taliban regime. For 2 decades following 9/11, the Afghan people contributed in the struggle against terrorism and trusted and relied on the partnership with the United States of America. However, the abrupt withdrawal of the U.S. troops has breached their trust and created a void that has allowed the Taliban to exploit the vulnerability of those who served honorably in the Afghan security forces and fought alongside U.S. troops. The partnership between Afghanistan and U.S. bettered regional and global security. However, today it's only the Afghan people and former Afghan security forces who pay the price for it with their lives and safety. I implore U.S. Congress, particularly this critical committee, to condemn the killing of former Afghan soldiers and officers officially and publicly, and to endorse further investigation of the treatment of former ANSF members under the Taliban rule. I urge the member of this committee to allocate resources and efforts to support initiatives that promote stability, security, and democratic governance in Afghanistan. By doing so, we can honor the memory of those Afghans and American soldiers who sacrificed their lives for a brighter future. Thank you for your attention and time.
Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and committee members. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Elizabeth Lynn. I served in the Air Force and the Navy Reserves. In 2011, I deployed to Afghanistan as a combat advisor, where I worked closely with the members of the Afghan National Army at FOB Gambari. I'm still working to get my interpreter out today. As the U.S. left, he emailed me and said simply, "Please apologize to me if I die." Today, I'm a director at Operation Recovery, where I lead our Afghanistan and resettlement missions. In warfare, we destroy bridges to harm our enemies. In 2021, we destroyed a bridge that harmed our allies, our service member community, and our nation. For 2 decades, countless Americans like myself and like many of you, members of this committee, devoted their lives to building a critical bridge of trust with our Afghan allies. We fought shoulder to shoulder with people who detested the Taliban and everything that they represent. An entire generation of Afghan allies grew up believing in American ideals of freedom and democracy. Our allies are now paying for their service with bloodshed. One Afghan ally documented a series of targeted executions through text messages and video. He was commando in Ghazni province, arrested, and then the Taliban killed him. One of his friends was hogtied and murdered, then dragged into the street, and villagers were forced to hit him with rocks until he looked like a giant blood splatter. The brother of the man in the video was forced by the Taliban to drink acid, and he also died. This was when they arrested him last week. The village was ordered to beat him with rocks until he was this pile of tissues. His son was there and watched the whole thing. The special operations veteran who received these videos and who served in Iraq and Afghanistan describes this retaliation as the most horrific carnage he has seen in his life. What will this veteran tell his children when they ask him if they should follow in his footsteps and join the military? Another ally who worked closely with us and who provided significant aid to American families trapped in Afghanistan after the withdrawal was abducted and tortured. And I quote, "They beat me with wire cables and hung weights from my testicles." Unlike the Americans he helped, this ally is still trapped in Afghanistan, despite applying for humanitarian parole more than 2 years ago. How likely are his friends and family to step up and help people like me if we go back? Since the U.S. withdrawal, Operation Recovery has received more than 800 formal reports like these. Our organization is tracking more than 7,000 Afghan allies. 2,190 are part of the Afghan Special Operations community, people who were uniquely trusted, who worked closely with U.S. forces for decades. We even turned to them for help when evacuating American personnel out of Kabul. This retaliation is happening to many close allies, such as the interpreters who also faithfully served. Unlike them, men and women who served in the special forces are not eligible for SIV status. Some that work directly with Americans are eligible for Priority 1 and Priority 2 programs. Despite being open to Afghan allies more than 2 years ago, they have only recently begun to process and are quite frankly being outpaced by Taliban atrocities. Some had sponsors who applied for humanitarian parole on their behalf. Unfortunately, applications from those still trapped in Afghanistan appear to have been categorically denied. During a 5-month period in fiscal year 2022, less than 1% had been approved. The lack of safe, legal passage for these families is effectively a death sentence. It is also a stain on the conscience of many veterans, public servants, and citizens. And most of all, it is dangerous. We must stand by those who have aided us and strengthen our global standing. Untold future allies will inevitably look towards our actions today when determining whether or not to entrust us with their hearts and minds. The long-term security of service members and our nation may very well be determined by whether we honor our nation's promise to Afghan allies. Let us do what is right for our allies, for our veterans, and for the success of this nation. I welcome your questions and look forward to continued dialogue after today's hearing, and I would encourage you to read our 120-page report on atrocities. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you.
Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Colonel Justin Sapp, and my testimony is based on my experience as a Special Forces officer with nearly 30 years of active duty service and multiple combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, I represent Badger 6, a nonprofit organization determined to help our very first Afghan allies. I was a captain in the 5th Special Forces Group when I was detailed to CIA's Team Alpha to infiltrate northern Afghanistan in October 2001. Among my 7 brothers in arms on that mission was Mike Spann, a CIA paramilitary and former Marine officer who was the first casualty on the battlefield in the global war on terrorism. Badger 6 was the call sign of the 3-man unit led by Mike that I was a part of in the earliest days of the war. In 2001, brave members of the Northern Alliance risked everything to fight with us on horseback. This remarkable story of the first Afghans who supported the U.S. in combat is the subject of Toby Harnden's book, First Casualty, in the 2018 movie, 12 Strong. In the end, 43 Americans and a few thousand Afghans defeated a force of Taliban and al-Qaeda in battles that featured cavalry charges enabled by U.S. Special Forces and close air support. This campaign liberated the strategically important city of Mazar-i-Sharif and set conditions for the Northern Alliance's victory in Kabul. Today, I will highlight ongoing threats faced by 2 of the families of Afghans who fought with me in 2001. Sadly, our Afghan partners have been under threat since our withdrawal from the country. Each and every one of them have lost their homes and have suffered beatings. Some are still on the run in Afghanistan. Others are destitute in neighboring countries where they live under the threat of deportation. The following examples are real-life accounts of how the Taliban are persecuting our allies. To protect these individuals, I have changed their names in the testimony. First, I would like to introduce you to the family of Rosie Khan, who was 36 years old when he was killed by al-Qaeda fighters in the initial moments of the prisoner uprising in Kalai-Jungi on November the 25th, 2001. Rosie Khan oversaw the processing of prisoners as they were prepared to be interviewed by CIA officers Mike Spann and David Tyson. Mike was killed seconds later, very possibly by the same men. In November 2021, 20 years after Rosie Khan's death, local Taliban commanders learned where his widow and now adult children were living. The Taliban bulldozed the family home into rubble and arrested his eldest son, torturing and beating him for days. That son suffered permanent damage to his kidneys and has continuing physical and mental health issues. Rosie Khan's widow and daughter were also threatened with violence and told they will be forcibly married to the Taliban, meaning a life of isolation, rape, and abuse. Badger 6 facilitated the family's escape to Pakistan, where they continue to receive harassing messages from the Taliban. The second Afghan ally I would like to highlight is Engineer Muhammad. He is a member of the Hazara ethnic minority, a group that has been the focus of ethno-sectarian persecution for hundreds of years. In 1998, the Taliban killed thousands of Hazara when large swaths of northern Afghanistan fell under their control. These atrocities are driven by profound racial prejudice, and because most Hazara are followers of Shia Islam, a religious branch deemed heretical by the Taliban. Engineer Muhammad was part of the original Badger 6 mission with Mike and me. He was our guide and interpreter, and, like many other Americans in the next 2 decades who had Afghan interpreters, we literally put our lives in his hands. Muhammad helped us survey helicopter landing zones that paved the way for the arrival of more CIA and Special Forces teams, key to defeating the Taliban. Muhammad was simply indispensable to our team during a critical stage of the war. Beginning in October 2021, the Taliban launched punitive raids into the valley where Muhammad and his family lived. His village was subsequently pillaged, and many Hazara homes were razed. The Taliban issued an arrest warrant for Muhammad and detained his family members. While detained, his family members were interrogated and beaten by Taliban security officials. The Taliban told his family that because Muhammad was famous locally for having cooperated with the U.S., he had been judged and would be executed. The Taliban have raided his house 10 times since 2021, every time stealing property, breaking doors and windows. As a final insult, his daughters were threatened with being married off as second and third wives to local Taliban officials. Muhammad has been forced to change his location nightly for the past 2 years to avoid being detained. He has not seen his family since. Congress can help these families and others like them by insisting on transparency in the clearance process and efficiency in the handling of immigration cases. We have not suffered an attack on our homeland since 9/11, and these men and their families are a critical part of ensuring that. If We do not help them. They face the prospect of being murdered by the same enemy they helped us defeat in 2001. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, committee members, I thank you again for allowing me to speak today. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and committee members, thank you for letting me come here today to testify. My name is Michael Sismar. I'm a former captain in the United States Marine Corps and a 29-year veteran of the FBI. After retirement, I decided to continue to serve my country from 2013 to 2021 as an anti-terrorism assistance mentor with the Department of State. I represent the nonprofit organization Rafiq, Friends of Afghans, who, in working with our partners, comprise Project Exodus Relief. Rafiq's founders are the U.S. anti-terrorism assistance mentors, comprised of former military, federal, state, and local law enforcement officers that work side by side our trusted and polygraphed Afghan security force counterparts, training and mentoring Afghan law enforcement personnel in the support for the war on terror. These Afghan men and women came from the General Command of Special Police Units, or GCPSU, and the Directorate of Public Safety, DPS, who fought terrorist threats daily. Members from the GCPSU consisted of the police commandos, also known as the Triples, who were the first responders to terrorist incidents in Afghanistan. These same people served as full-time staff instructors at the Joint Afghan Training Center, or JATC, located outside of Kabul. There were 54 instructors from these agencies being paid a monthly stipend from the U.S. State Department as an incentive. It is part of my Marine and SWAT team DNA to never leave anybody behind. The pain and the stain on the honor of all the veterans who served their country faithfully during Operation Enduring Freedom is something that doesn't go away. We have record of countless acts of hideous violence. The execution of a pregnant Afghan national police officer in front of her husband, the beheading of two 12-year-old boys after the fall of Panjshir, and the hanging of two members of the National Directorate of Security after they were granted amnesty, and the list goes on. Afghan security officers and their families now live day to day under the most severe conditions, with the Taliban actively hunting them. They lack the means and necessities to care for their families. If the Taliban doesn't imprison or kill them, they're most likely going to die of exposure or starvation. And again, all this time they're still hoping that America hasn't forgotten them. We have a much larger database of atrocities that we have compiled, but we have compiled a chronological list of incidents perpetrated specifically against JATC personnel. These reports are firsthand witness and victim accounts translated by the same people for submission. From the fall to present, Rafiq has had numerous incidents involving members and former students. For security reasons, anybody that's still alive, I'm just going to use a first name on those individuals. First is Nora Zadran, also known as Noor, and his brother Hayatullah. Both were trained basic snipers at JATC and were members of the GCPSU 333 in Logar. Hayatullah became a sniper instructor at the JATC. Noor and his brother Hayatullah were exceptional marksmen and were known and on the Taliban's most wanted list. Noor was denied a seat during the evacuation, but his brother Hayatullah made it out on a British evac. On September 12, 2021, the Taliban found, then shot and killed Noor in front of his family. Shams. Shams is a former member of DPS and was my senior sniper instructor at JATC. He was arrested by what we believe to be a rogue Taliban unit in mid-September of 2021, was subject to beatings and torture, and after extorting what they could from him, released on September 23rd of 2021. In fear of his life and that of his family, Shams packed him up and without documents made a long multi-leg escape to Pakistan and eventually was evacuated to Spain. On January 30th, 2023, the Taliban located and arrested Saeed, a former instructor at the JATC counterterrorism section. Saeed was interrogated and tortured for 5 weeks, at which time the Taliban agreed to release Saeed, extorting him of all the money he had and any information. On September of 2023, Ahmad Zubar Nouri, a former member of the Presidential Protective Service, who we had assisted to get to Pakistan, but for economic reasons came back to Afghanistan, was located by the Taliban and hung in front of his wife and 2 young daughters. And then last, on October 20th of 2023, Fawad, Hanif, and Muhammad, all former members of JATC, were almost simultaneously arrested by Department 7, also known as GDI. All 3 were held in dungeon-like extreme cold environments and subject to extensive torture. On one occasion, the Taliban utilized shock torture on Fawad. Muhammad was released after 4 days, but Fawad and Hanif were held for a total of 5 weeks. Fawad suffered a broken knee and Hanif a broken shoulder. To effect their release, they were extorted for money and any money their families could raise. In closing, it is our sincere hope and prayer that once this committee has fully reviewed and evaluated the atrocities being committed by the Taliban against our friends, they will see a need for transformative change to the current SIV requirements, which, once implemented, will allow for a path to immigration for our Afghan Special Operations counterparts. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to testify today.
Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, honorable committee members, and friends of Afghanistan. I'm Thomas Kaza, the Executive Director of the 12-8 Foundation and a Green Beret with 15 years in uniform. The following opinions are mine alone. Now, the improvised explosive device was the insurgents' weapon of choice in Afghanistan, responsible for some 55% of Special Forces deaths. To combat this threat, a unit of specially trained Afghans was formed to safeguard Green Berets like me. They were known as the National Mine Reduction Group, or NMRG, DoD contractors, which makes them eligible for the Special Immigrant Visa. They were our most trusted partners, because while the war was marred by the infamous green on blue attacks, our trust in them was so complete that they lived on our bases with easy access to huge quantities of weaponry and high explosives. The hazards they undertook were immense. From 2015 onwards, 22 Green Berets died in Afghanistan, compared to 47 NMRG members in the same time frame. We owe them a tremendous debt, but they've been abandoned. In the quagmire of the SIV approval process, many have been killed waiting, dozens are missing, and their applications are being increasingly denied for arbitrary reasons. So I understand some might ask, what made them volunteer for the most dangerous job in Afghanistan? I'll tell you that was faith. Faith that the United States of America was honorable and moral, would protect them in return for protecting us. And American leaders, civil and military, Democrat and Republican, were found faithless when it mattered the most. Now, rather than debating the normalization of the Taliban, I will illuminate the fallout of continued apathy and half measures. Because it is apathy that allows us to violate our principles and ignore promises. It is apathy which allows us to betray our allies. Now, apathy does not manifest itself to the failings of government, or does not limit itself to the failings of government. It leaches into our societal fabric and manifests in the indifferences of our leaders and our institutions. Now, given this current audience, I imagine that many here are likely familiar with National Geographic's documentary Retrograde, which chronicles the final collapse of Afghanistan. And what makes it so impactful and so unconscionably damnable is that no faces are blurred, no identity is concealed, whether American or Afghan, a creative decision approved by Disney and Nat Geo executives. Think of the absolute arrogance required to believe that the Taliban somehow would not find an online video which chronicled their ultimate triumph. And if not arrogance, the absolute soulless indifference towards exposing and exploiting those who protected American soldiers. And so, as Retrograde became a hit in Hollywood, it became a hit list in Afghanistan. A hit list which the Taliban used to identify, abduct, torture, and kill one whom my organization pledged to protect, a 21-year-old father named Omar. Now, Disney has since refused to aid those who were exposed, the others, many dozens who were exposed, but they are far from alone in their own apathy. Because though Green Berets aspire to the motto, De oppressor liber, or to free the oppressed, senior leaders desecrate this ethos by permitting an outsider to put accolades and golden statues ahead of our own partner force. However, I'm not here for Disney or Nat Geo because they were enabled by policy. I'm here instead to give a voice to someone who had his taken. Because while Omar was on his deathbed, an Afghan member of my foundation spoke with him and recorded his account. The following has been edited for the clarity of this roundtable, but a timestamp original has been entered into the record. Now, this is Omar's testimony. While on my way to the bazaar, Taliban members stopped my taxi and asked for my identification. They showed their commanders, but otherwise didn't do anything. However, 2 days later, they came to my home and arrested me. I was held for 16 days. They tortured me, drowned me, broke my ribs, and I lost consciousness multiple times. I don't remember being released, but one morning my family woke up to dogs barking and found me lying in the street. The beatings left me barely able to breathe, and a doctor said that my lung wasn't working. Then my family got me to Peshawar, Pakistan, where I then underwent 4 surgeries. While the Taliban had me, they showed me the Retrograde movie and accused me of working with the foreign forces in it. They asked me what my job was, and I told them I cleared IEDs. They found me through Retrograde and are still asking villagers and family members about me. Unfortunately, soon after giving this statement, Omar would succumb to his wounds. So, we are here to talk about Taliban reprisals. That's your case study. Nat Geo gave the Taliban a target package. The Taliban used it. Now, in closing, I'll say that I hate that being an ally to the U.S. is such a thankless proposition. But beyond that, I want the gratitude that I enjoy as an American veteran extended to those who risked their lives for me. Habib Bostan, to our most senior energy members, spent 19 years serving alongside U.S. troops. 19 years. Kashmir spent 15. Amman 10, Gardasha 8. All have had their applications, or SIV applications, rejected for nonsensical reasons. Let us now honor them for putting their lives on the line for this country, our country. So now, honorable members of the committee, will you let apathy damn them to the same fate as Omar? Or will you instead enforce the promises made to them who protected American soldiers? I ask you that now that you designate the NRG for prioritized processing within the SIV program so that they may truly be thanked for their services. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and committee members, thank you for this opportunity to speak about reprisals against our Afghan Justice Sector allies. My name is Joe Maida. My testimony is based on 6 years in Afghanistan and other time with the Department of Defense. I'm part of a group of over 120 individuals of diverse political backgrounds and nationalities advocating for the legal passage of Justice Sector officials out of Afghanistan. The NATO Afghan Justice Sector Group has no formal affiliation with NATO, and opinions expressed here are my own, nor do I profess to speak for the numerous other groups doing good work in this area. During our mission in Afghanistan, Afghan attorneys were force multipliers and the tip of the spear for many of our efforts of the Department of State, Department of Defense, and Department of Justice. In the shape, clear, hold counterinsurgency paradigm, they were tasked with upholding the rule of law, facing in courtrooms many of the same Taliban, Haqqani, and al-Qaeda insurgent elements our troops faced on the battlefields. My remarks today will focus on individuals in the criminal justice sector, especially prosecutors of the Taliban and insurgent groups who appear to be most at risk. There were many other heroic efforts by attorneys in areas such as domestic violence against women, corruption, counter-narcotics, and violent crime, whose welfare, I submit, should also be our concern. I'll first focus on the Justice Center in Parwan, known as the JCEP, where prosecutors bravely confronted the insurgents who fought coalition troops on the battlefield. Retired Army Major General Pat Reinert has been our valued military partner in these efforts and was responsible for the JCEP. The Central Court, where over 5,000 trials of high-value detainees took place. Those convicted routinely received lengthy prison sentences. Without them, military operations against insurgents would have been impossible in Afghanistan due to Afghan law. These officials are viewed by the Taliban and others as direct proxies for retribution against both Afghan and U.S. paramilitary actions. The Department of Defense and Department of Justice have sponsored visas for many of these individuals, though the process is lengthy and exposes our allies to danger. Other prosecutors held those accountable for acts of terror against the Afghan populace and NATO civilian elements in public courts located in population centers interfacing directly with the insurgents. Their faces and names were broadcast on televised media and circulated in print. They are well known at a higher profile than many other Afghan government officials or individuals directly employed by the U.S. government, such as mechanics or cooks who have a legal pathway forward to citizenship here in the U.S. I worked with one such individual who I will call Abdul. In addition to insurgent prosecutions, he also helped establish the first domestic violence unit in his office. He served as an important source of information on Taliban and malign nation-state compromise of the office, which helped our team stay alive while doing our jobs for the U.S. government. He was kidnapped and tortured by the Taliban during my time with him, but returned to work until the fall of the Afghan government. With his wife, who was a media figure and English language instructor at a local university, they remain stranded alongside their 3 children with no legal pathway forward. They are on the run and actively hunted by the Taliban. In August 2021, most justice sector officials stood by their post as the Taliban flooded the streets. All detainees in Afghan prisons were released and able to take retribution. Justice sector officials are easily identified, unable to work, and hunted. The Taliban has ongoing efforts to obtain lists of prosecutors through local mosques, community leaders, and house-to-house inquiries. It is estimated that over 30 former prosecutors have been murdered in targeted killings. There are estimated to be 60 justice officials right now in Taliban prisons. The daughters of these officials are also at increased risk of forced marriage to Taliban members. The Department of State was the lead for rule of law in training more than 2,000 justice sector attorneys. As Afghanistan sought to transition from a might makes right governance of Taliban oppression, justice officials took risks based on their desire to establish rule of law and build their own democracy, as we had advised and encouraged them to do so. The State Department has allowed us to submit visa applications for female defense attorneys and prosecutors. For this and their partnership, we are grateful. But these cases are lingering. We respectfully ask Congress to engage the Department of State and support them in expanding its consideration to all criminal justice sector officials and expedite processing their cases. I want to thank the Moral Compass Foundation, Jewish Humanitarian Response, and the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys who provided valuable input from our comments today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, members of the committee, thank you for attending this and thank you for holding this critical roundtable. My name is Andrew Sullivan. I'm a veteran of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the highlight of my career being an Army Infantry Company commander in Afghanistan in 2013 and 2014. I currently serve as the Director of Advocacy at No One Left Behind, the oldest charitable organization that works to support our Afghan and Iraqi SIVs. I'm humbled to testify today because I feel an obligation to speak on behalf of people that can't be here. Some of the people that can't be here today include over 50,000 Afghans that have reached out to No One Left Behind since the fall of Kabul. It also includes over 120 volunteers that work for No One Left Behind, that sacrifice their time and their mental health for free to try and help Afghans, many of whom they've never met. I also speak on behalf of 830,000 American veterans, many of whom are suffering from acute moral injuries caused by abandoning our wartime allies. It's a feeling I share. But most importantly, I feel the need to speak on behalf of the Afghan allies that were killed by the Taliban. In September 2020, No One Left Behind released a report in which we cataloged over 300 interpreters or their family members that were killed by the Taliban due to their association with the U.S. mission. Unfortunately, since the U.S. withdrawal, that risk has not abated. In fact, it's only increased. In December of 2022, No One Left Behind issued a survey to over 13,600 Afghans that were in our network. We asked them if they knew of any reprisal killings of SIVs who were waiting on processing of their visa. Many of the responses we received didn't actually detail deaths, but were instead just, incredibly moving pleas for help. But in addition to these cries for help, we received 242 responses of extrajudicial killings of Afghans that were waiting for evacuation. We could not independently verify each of these accounts. The ever-present and terrifying threat of Taliban violence suppresses these stories from being told. As one respondent stated about the killing of his cousin, quote, "This may happen to anyone who supported the U.S. government in Afghanistan, but the Taliban closed the media coverage to share these kinds of news." The victims in these stories all had some affiliation with the U.S. government, and all would have very compelling cases for U.S. refugee admissions program. But in addition to the 242, over 100 were at some stage of the SIV application process or had very clear prima facie SIV cases. These Afghans were our closest allies. They were employed directly on behalf of America, but rather than receive safety in the U.S., they faced brutality at the hands of the Taliban. One of the starkest cases for me that stands out. It was of an interpreter that was killed in Jalalabad in September of 2021. His friend submitted the following. I entered a shop to buy us some drinks when I heard gunshots. I came out of the shop and saw Imdadullah being shot in front of his 2 kids and his kids crying. Imdadullah had done his SIV interview in the Kabul embassy and was waiting for pickup before his hopes were shattered. I'm grateful to the committee for being able to share Imdadullah's story, but telling his story is not sufficient. Congress and the administration must take action. We must improve SIV processing. It routinely takes well over 9 months, which is required by statute. In the last report, it took over 600 days to process an SIV on average. Despite the dire situation for our allies, only one piece of SIV-related legislation has been passed since the fall of Kabul. It was an authorization of a paltry 4,000 additional SIVs. Our allies cannot wait. If our promise is to mean anything, Congress must support our allies by immediately passing the bipartisan and bicameral Afghan Adjustment Act and Afghan Allies Protection Act of 2023. Passing these bills won't right all of the wrongs, but it will prevent additional bloodshed. Finally, it's important to realize that our Afghan allies are not alone in feeling abandoned. Despite all the challenges facing Afghan SIV applicants, they at least have a path forward. Many of our wartime allies, interpreters from Iraq and Syria, have no path forward. In Iraq, the 1244 SIV program is moribund. It's accepted no new applications since September of 2014. In Syria, there is no program. I would like to thank Rep. Crow and Rep. Waltz. They had introduced legislation in both the 115th and 116th Congress to rectify this. It unfortunately has not been signed into law. Syria is not alone. In Yemen, local national employees have been detained and harassed by the Houthis as early as 2021. That risk has only increased. So I want to center our Afghan voices today, but I want to make sure that we never do this again to any other population of wartime allies. America must learn from the brutal consequences of our failures in Afghanistan. We must create a permanent SIV program that is not tied to one specific country or war. We must anticipate that we may need to help others, even if it's in small numbers, again in the future. A permanent path for those who sacrificed and worked on our behalf would empower the U.S. military to recruit local national allies. It would strengthen our national security and would save lives for decades to come. For America to keep its promise, we must share these harrowing stories of Taliban reprisal. Our murdered allies deserve that we tell their stories, but we must expedite the relocation of vulnerable Afghans, and we must create policies to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Thank you again for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and committee members. My name is Amy Martin, and I represent the 20 member organizations of Moral Compass Federation that are not able to speak before you today. I also represent a generation of Americans on the brink of adulthood when 9/11 occurred, the GWAT generation. Like many of our representatives in Congress, I did not serve in our military. I sit with you as an American citizen who witnessed my ex-husband, my friends, my neighbors, and my fellow citizens face the realities of the 20-year Afghanistan war, both home and abroad. I am urgently pleading with my government to honor the commitment we made to protect our Afghan partners who fought shoulder to shoulder with Americans and our allies for 20 years. The actions you take regarding these partners have ripple effects across my generation and the ones to follow. Today, my colleagues shared harrowing accounts of the Taliban's brutal reprisals against Afghans who bravely supported the war. These stories detail just a glimpse of the thousands of documented horrors exacted upon our Afghan forces. Moral Compass Federation was formed to stand with our Afghan allies, offering support from their perilous journey to eventual resettlement in the U.S. In every waking moment, our phones are inundated with desperate messages from those in limbo, wondering if their visa packets will be approved, how they'll survive the wait for care flights, or protect their families from discovery and execution. Some, like the special forces that fought and trained with our own, ask why they have no visa pathway to safety at all. The haunting silence that follows often precedes grim images of once valiant comrades battered, mutilated, or executed. The members of Moral Compass Federation, whom I represent today, are tired. But we uphold a promise made as Americans. Those who risked everything for us will be protected. I ask you now to imagine a room in the not-so-distant future, in a far-off corner of the globe. A soldier is seated at a table, sharing tea with a potential ally, asking for his trust. This potential ally recalls images of the tragic sights of individuals plunging to their fate in Kabul, remembers how he watched in horror as mothers desperately attempted to save their children by throwing them over barbed wire walls, and knows stories of Afghans left to die at the hands of the enemy. This is not just about Afghanistan. The conversation in this room and the decisions you make have a direct impact on our national foreign policy interests. Our actions are being scrutinized by both allies and adversaries. How we treat our partners matters. How we conduct our affairs matters. We bear a moral duty to those who have dedicated themselves to protecting us. This duty is not merely strategic, it is a profoundly significant reflection of our commitment to American ideals. Neglecting this duty risks perilous consequences. The conversation in this room and the decisions you make also have a direct impact on our military and our readiness as a nation. Tens of thousands of American service members across our nation are suffering today from moral injuries caused by our failure to honor our promises to their trusted Afghan allies. Their families and communities suffer alongside them. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death in veterans under age 45. Our armed services are failing to meet recruitment goals necessary to maintain a healthy fighting force, and Americans' confidence in the military is at its lowest point in 35 years. Recognizing and addressing the moral toll of the Afghanistan withdrawal is crucial, not only for the well-being of our armed forces, but also for the overall strength and resilience of our nation. Helping Afghan partners helps veterans. You invited us today to share in a conversation to learn. I implore you to leave this hearing today and act. Our requests are urgent and clear. Ensure viable visa pathways for our most trusted and vetted Afghan allies, and forge a public-private partnership with the veteran organizations represented today. The relocation and resettlement of our Afghan allies is a complex issue, crossing agencies, branches of government, and political parties. Your actions can help end this crisis, begin to heal our veterans' moral injury, and show the world that America's values endure. The room I asked you to imagine in the not-so-distant future holds two people who may be allies or who may be adversaries. Ask yourself, how will the conversations in this room today affect that room across the globe? Will we create enemies or partners? Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank all of you for your testimonies. Your words, your experiences, and your continued mission are all beyond powerful. I know that we have a number of questions. We hope to gain insight from what it is that you've experienced, what it is that you can tell us. I'm going to start with my colleagues. We'll go back and forth from one side to the other, but we'll start with Mr. Van Orden and Mr. Self. Who's here first?
Thank you, all of you. I'm sorry? I'll admit, I was in Afghanistan very early, not as early as Colonel Sapp, but within a couple of months. So my service in Afghanistan was while we were still on the offensive, real offensive. I want to ask you, Elizabeth, you're tracking 7,000 SIVs now? All pathways, got it. Can anyone tell me why only 1% are approved, if I understood Elizabeth correctly?
That was
Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know. We would like to know too. That would be something that would be what we would like to hear, because we looked up, we have a FOIA report in our statement. And I'm not going to try to give you the correct number, the exact number, but it was less than 1% approved, even though these are service members and veterans that are applying on behalf of the Afghans that they worked with. These are people that are known to us, that have been vetted extensively, and yet there was not enough evidence to show that there was atrocities happening or that they were under threat. And I think we've all said that today, that there is a threat to these people.
Yeah, I looked over your recommendations again, and a lot of them are, we can do legislative action, but my question is, how do we change an administration that if we ask them to change their behavior toward these people that still need to be pulled out, we're asking them to admit that they made a mistake. How do we do that? Y'all deal with this area every day. How would you recommend we do that? I've got your recommendations, which are a pathway, mainly pathway, and you've got some others, humanitarian and so forth and so on. But all of this will take the executive branch participation and cooperation. Has anybody had any success in doing that?
Representative, thank you for your question. We are grateful to the State Department's CARE office. They are working hard to evacuate our allies. However, there's work to be done with that office. There are efficiencies that can be increased. I think all of us here would love the opportunity to sit with the CARE office and talk about how that can be done. And not just CARE, that's IOM, that is the PRM, and the other State Department agencies that are responsible for this task.
I believe that's the first time I've heard anyone say State Department is working closely. But I appreciate that input. How, anyone want to answer this question? How should the United States government view the Taliban? We don't recognize them. We give them money. We're still giving them money. How should we recognize? Because this is a national security policy. How do you think we should view, as a United States policy, the Taliban?
To put it short, as a criminal enterprise.
But they rule this nation.
Correct.
Yeah, they should be considered as a criminal conspiracy.
I totally agree. They are a criminal network. They are a terrorist organization. They are now harboring 27 groups of terrorist organizations in Afghanistan. Right, just the UN released a report that Al-Qaeda established 8 new camps inside Afghanistan. So the Taliban should be treated as a terrorist organization.
Anyone else? I think that's a critical point. How we view the Taliban, what is the United States national policy to the Taliban? Anyone else?
I just want to say the difficulty, I think, lies too in the fact that we have to deal with them if we want to get our allies out. So, you know, there's a balance that needs to be struck, and we have to continue to work to get our allies out of Afghanistan, and that's where we need to find the solutions.
Well, let me ask you that, because we've got, one more question. We've got Qatar that is the go-between between Hamas and Israel. Who is the Qatar in this situation? Is there one?
I would say it's close to being Qatar, but it's not working. There's no recognition, right? So there's no recognition of a government. So we're kind of stuck in that rut where we're trying to get our allies out of a country that doesn't have a government, and we're trying to work with somebody who's not a government, and we're trying to work with somebody who's not trusted.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Self. Mr. Crow?
Thank you all. I mean, you just paint a horrifying and damning picture for what our friends and allies are going through now. It's heartbreaking and it's unacceptable. And I know we have to, always recommit to solving this. And I wanted to just give a couple of shout outs to folks who have made that commitment. Mr. Nunn, you are sponsoring both the Afghan Adjustment Act and the Afghan Allies Protection Act. Thank you for that very much. I want to give a shout out to my friend Brad Winstrup from Ohio, Mr. Winstrup, who introduced with me at the beginning of this Congress the Afghan Allies Protection Act, which would streamline the SIV program, expand the SIV program, add remote processing to that program, which would address some of the issues, not all of them. So Mr. Winstrup's been an essential partner with me in that effort, and Mr. Waltz as well, who we have a long history of working together to to start evacuation early. We were some of the voices that said we needed to do evacuation way before August of 21 to try to address this issue, and we continue to work together. Mr. Waltz and I actually recently introduced a resolution that would condemn the Taliban and their human rights abuses and their atrocities on a bipartisan basis that would call for continued support of the people of Afghanistan and their continued fight for freedom and democracy. So I thank you for your partnership in that effort as well. So in the interest of trying to identify what we can do more and what we can do better, in terms of the pipeline coming out, we talked about Qatar. Qatar is really pretty much the only game in town in terms of getting flights out, processing folks to their U.S. interest section of their embassy there. Talk to me about the pipeline. How can we identify the pipeline and safely get folks? So even if we pass the AAPA and expand visas and provide the authority, we know that them getting, them being our partners, getting to the embassies, getting to the airport safely, and actually taking advantage of these authorities is a huge barrier because they're being hunted down and movement is very hard for them. So what do we have to do to hit that piece and make sure they can safely take advantage of these opportunities when they arise?
Thank you, sir. So really, I think it's a number of things. To increase throughput, we need more lily pads, as you mentioned. Qatar is CAS is predominantly where they're going through. There is also Albania and others, but increasing the number of lily pads available, increasing flights. I will say some of that comes down to appropriating properly to make sure that state is able to man and resource everything from ACIV to NVC to actually move the process along. I will also mention, sir, you talked about expanding the visas available. I don't think people realize how dire it is right now. We are down to, and this is as of September 30th. So this is now no longer, correct. It's likely 1,000 less than this. But we only had 11,590 visas available, and that is against 148,000 applicants. As you had mentioned, sir, the Afghan Allies Protection Act would add another 20,000 visas. I think that's a critical step in doing it. So I think there are ways that we need to both increase throughput, but right now we just don't have the visas available so that even if we do increase that throughput, we will be running out of visas sooner rather than later.
If I could add to that point, one of the things that I'm very proud of with Moral Compass Federation is we operate end to end. So we don't stop supporting allies once they get out of Afghanistan. We support them here in the U.S. too. Another thing that would increase that, another bottleneck in the system, is a lack of capacity on the U.S. side for resettlement. So there are resettlement agencies managed by PRM all over the country, and frankly there aren't enough of them, and they don't have enough case managers or resources to accept the number of people. Even if we did increase the throughput, increase the flights, they couldn't take them on this end. So it really is kind of a whole continuum approach that would need to be adjusted to be able to get to that 5,000 number that we're looking for.
That's helpful. Thank you. And Ms. Martin, I will relay your request and all of your requests to meet with CARE and PRM and these organizations because they should be doing that regularly, in my view, to take advantage of your expertise. And Andrew as well, your idea of, I think it was you that mentioned that we should have a permanent structure in place for future operations when we go in and we work with local nationals and interpreters. We just can't do this again. Right, and this has happened in the past too, with prior conflicts, not just Afghanistan. There has to be a permanent structure in place so that we're not relitigating this issue. And I appreciate that idea, and we'll follow up with all of you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crow. Mr. Van Orden.
I want to thank you all for coming today. I have multiple tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and a bunch of other garden spots. I just want to wind
back the clock a little bit, because as Mr. Crow just said, we can't do this again, but if we forget why this happened to begin with, we will be doing this again. So the Biden administration chose to unilaterally withdraw from Afghanistan without the consent of our NATO partners. No one else wanted to go. Biden did, set a date, left. They evacuated 24,000 Afghans from the country randomly. 13,000 of these Afghan refugees wound up in Fort McCoy, which is in the 3rd Congressional District, of which I represent. 0 of them were eligible for SIVs. 0. And 90% of the SIV eligible folks were left in the country. This is malfeasance by the Biden administration. It cannot be forgotten ever. The Special Inspector General's report said that between August 21, when Biden abandoned Afghanistan, up till April of 23, the United States government, through various agencies, have given the Taliban directly $8 billion. That's not the equipment. That's $7.6 billion. We're talking about $8 billion to the Taliban, of which everybody here described them as a criminal enterprise. So here's the problem. The Taliban is a criminal enterprise. And the Biden administration, through just the worst planning possible, through the State Department and the Department of Defense, if you recall, Secretary Austin said we're going to take the Taliban at their word. Remember that? The Secretary of Defense said we're going to take the Taliban at their word to make sure that our friends that kept me and my buddies and some of you alive, that they were going to go ahead and trust them to get them on a plane to get out. It's inexcusable. And honest to goodness, I don't see light at the end of this tunnel. I want to be very frank with you. I mean, we are adults here, and many of us are combat veterans, and we do not have the luxury of shining each other on. Because we're dealing with a criminal element, an enterprise that is the Taliban. There's resurgence of all different these terrorist groups inside of Afghanistan. And how do we actually get them out is the issue. I was one of the people that got on an aircraft and flew over to the Middle East to try to rescue American citizens. As I was running for Congress, I just left because I couldn't sleep. So I feel this at a real visceral level. So in your opinion, I mean, are we truly going to be able to get a significant amount of these people out of the country, or are we just spinning our wheels? Because the Biden administration is responsible for degrading our reputation on the world stage, and I personally would be very hesitant to work with us as an ally in the future with this current administration. So I'm just going to ask you around the table, do you really think we can get more of our friends out?
I think the short answer, yes, but it's via attrition, not because we know what we're doing, per se. There are ways forward. There are ways forward. However, standards are essentially changing all the time. Like, the goalposts are shifting. Look at the documentation these guys have to provide. What was good 6 months ago is no longer good now. There's no codified standard for who's getting out and what they need to provide. So if we can find out what we actually need from them on our side,
That's
probably make it happen. But
so that's set by the State Department or by the Taliban?
it's the State Department.
Thank you. Ma'am?
No, I was just going to say the same. We have to remain hopeful that we can get these people out. There's pathways, there's legal pathways, and we have to improve what we're doing. And we can do better.
When we say we, let's be crystal clear. The executive branch of the United States government is responsible for this. Congress can pass legislation all day long, but if it's not followed by the executive branch, it's meaningless. So if we can't get solid, like black and white, this is what you need from the State Department, that resides directly on Mr. Blinken's head. So if you can tell us how this has shifted, sir, if you can give us examples of this, then we can write this up. We can send letters over there and say, knock it off. Because yes, ma'am, we always have hope, but hope plus hard work equals good luck, right?
I think our continued dialogue would resonate with more people, more U.S. agencies that are doing this. We need those people to sit at the table with us and have those conversations.
Okay. Would anyone else like to add to that?
I frankly refuse to believe that with the correct political courage and bipartisanship that we are all here to see in our amazing American government, that we can't get this done. I don't think there's anything that we can't achieve when we work together and across the aisle, and when we work interdepartmentally and smartly. And again, we're all here. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think it were possible.
I understand. One of our biggest problems as a congressional staff or constituent services are getting passports for American citizens. So take that and extrapolate that over of getting some of our allies out of a what's arguably an uncertain for sure doctrinally used to be a combat zone that is being controlled by a terrorist criminal element. That's part of the problem. The State Department is failing abjectly. Again, with that, I yield back. Thank you for coming here, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Van Orden. And I bet all of us as members can attest that one of the biggest things we deal with is bureaucrats in government nickel and diming, making whatever the issue is in government, making people come to them, not giving them the full list of everything that's needed, and then making them come back again, and again. But this is a situation where every time they have to come back to the well is a life and death situation, and there's just not a healthy respect for that. It's being treated as business as usual, in my opinion. Mr. Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to be here. Sorry for walking in late, guys. I had a prior meeting. Mr. Sullivan, were you saying in your testimony that it takes about 900 days to process an SIV at this time?
Correct, sir. So from the most recent, and it has shifted around, but most recent quarterly report, it was actually 608 days. 9 months is what Congress has said is statute. Routinely, it takes far more than that. Most recent was 608 days.
Wow. All right. Like some of my colleagues have talked about, we definitely want to help get our folks and our allies out of there as quickly as possible. I guess my big question for you guys as operators and those that have spent time on the ground, because this town seems to have a very short memory. Some of my colleagues have talked about this isn't the first time this type of thing has happened. Does your guys' experience in Afghanistan, how does that affect your ideology moving forward with U.S. involvement in foreign affairs? Does it make you more cautious? I'm going to start with you, Mr. Sanjar, on the end.
Well, Congressman, the Afghan people, majority of Afghan people supported the U.S. mission and the international allies in Afghanistan. That was the first time in our history that Afghans did not fought foreign troops inside Afghanistan, but supported. And millions of Afghans are thankful for the sacrifices and the resources that the United States invested in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, with the withdrawal, there are some sort of disbelief is happening.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and especially with the situation with the people that fought alongside the U.S. troops.
Thank you.
And at the same time, with the agreement they signed in Doha with the Taliban, with the terrorist organization, in the absence of real representation of Afghan people.
Mr. Sapp, what about you? Does this make you more cautious, seeing what you've seen?
I would say I am more reticent, Representative, because I know the arc of history. I was a little kid when April 75 happened in Saigon, and I lived overseas, and I saw how foreigners reacted to their perception of the United States' psychological will after that war based on how things played out. And I've seen that kind of ebb and flow in a sine wave. And recently, I think it's at a nadir. In my last job, I had a lot of dealings with foreign military officers, and the reflections I received from them was very much like, you need to be mindful of the perception that actions, telegraph. And I think in Afghanistan, it was very clear that, the perception was one of psychological will or lack of will. And so as we go and we embark on other foreign policy endeavors, for lack of a better word, we really need to make sure that we have the will and the staying power, because we are being judged. And psychological perceptions, particularly by our adversaries, are incredibly important. Something we don't necessarily operate in that same space, but they look for vulnerabilities, and where they look for them is in their perception of our psychological sort of state of mind and our will.
Yeah. I feel like I'm probably as patriotic as anybody at this table. I dropped out of school my senior year in college, tried to join the SEAL teams, didn't make it through, finally made it through, did a couple pumps with the SEAL teams, you know, but I got to be honest, I'm very pessimistic of this government right now, okay? And I'm sure many of you guys are as well. And it's not just because of what I saw in Afghanistan. I mean, we don't even protect our own citizens, sadly, if you look at like the southern border right now, right? And so it's, Americans are pissed off and they're frustrated, and time hasn't stopped since Afghanistan. As you guys all see, the world is on fire right now. And this is why I asked the question I did, because how do we make sure these types of things don't happen in the future? Well, first, you know, you got to have solid leadership, which clearly we don't have. And I don't care if that sounds partisan. That's just what it is. And that's why you guys are here right now, because we didn't have good leadership. And I'm concerned with what I see in this town each and every day, that you know, until we get some solid leadership and get some of our own stuff straightened out here, the more we get involved around the world, the more panels are going to be coming up here with different faces from all over the world talking about how the U.S. bungled and screwed something else up and left a bunch of our allies on some other foreign battlefield. So, and I'm sorry for being so pessimistic, guys, but it's what happens when you know, spend so much time up here. Thomas, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would look at any future U.S. endeavors with extreme skepticism.
Me too.
You had an SF teammate get killed over there, and like you want to tell it would have like meant something, but it doesn't matter what I think if it meant anything. It matters like how this country approaches things and how we really honor that kind of sacrifice and that kind of commitment. And when you see everything you fought for go for naught, it kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to, we will do everything that we can to help this mission because it is important. I just wanted to talk about how we make sure this doesn't happen in the future, because you guys are going to be some of the leading voices that people actually listen to, because you have on the ground experience. And when you speak, it means a lot more than just some bureaucrat in a think tank up here. So I hope you use your voices to, you know, add some caution and some just wisdom as we move forward in the future. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly want to echo the thanks to you personally, Chairman Mast, and you, Ranking Member Crow, all the members that are here. I mean, we're all pulled in a million different directions. Obviously, Washington is reactive and chases the issue of the day, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's Gaza. But I hope this hearing today is not only a demonstration to you, but every veteran out there watching, that we haven't forgotten. We're not going to let this go. And we are going to continue to push and help you in any way we possibly can. They are not forgotten, period. And I just got a desperate note yesterday morning. Please, brother, help me. They're hunting me. So I thank you. Ms. Martin, I wanted to pull the thread on something. I just want to be clear. Are you testifying today that you have not met with State Department's CARE office, or has anyone here met with CARE? And if you have, when?
I can just speak for myself first. The organization that I founded that still exists today, React DC, which is a member organization of Moral Compass, it's not here today. We used to attend weekly State Department CARE meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Used to?
Formally attended, right. When did those stop?
Sometime last year.
I will say, so from No One Left Behind's perspective, we still do have biweekly meetings with CARE and then a separate one with NSC. It's limited participation, though. I think it would be incredibly beneficial when you look at how many groups are actually taking part of this, that it was opened up to more than just the handful of groups that get to participate with both CARE and NSC.
What do you accomplish in the biweekly meetings?
identifying systemic issues with everything from paperwork to how we're communicating.
What's changed as a result of those meetings?
We have made improvements. I mean, some of the paperwork has been streamlined when you look at the processing. I'm trying to remember when exactly it happened, but it used to be that SIV applicants, after they got COM approval, then had to submit to DHS. That's now no longer the case. So there's better actual coordination within the USG.
What I'm trying to get at is, I mean, I just recently spoke with Secretary Blinken one-on-one about this. He's receiving weekly reports. State Department has testified, and he verified they're processing about 1,000 a month at 12,000 a year. Do the math. We're looking at over a decade while these people are being hunted. So I don't, and he really didn't give me answers, nor have I received answers on how we can accelerate the throughput. So how can we accelerate the throughput?
100% agree. It's not nearly enough. We need more people that are actually doing the COM approval, that are issuing visas, and then
More State Department employees or contractors that are
Correct.
actually processing would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, what else?
Additional flights, not only is it the visa, but then it's the travel out. So is there, additional flights out? Amy had made a great point that receiving people here on this side is incredibly important. So actually having the organizations that can resettle refugees, having them be able to take it in.
I hope everyone can appreciate when we see 2 to 3 million people pouring across our southern border that are relocated all over the United States, yet Ms. Martin, State Department PRM doesn't have enough resources and therefore creates a backlog where we can't get our allies out.
Correct. It's one of many choke points.
Okay. Thank you for that. How are you, just in general, how are you all funding yourselves?
Mom and pop.
I mean, I've talked to people I literally talked to a gentleman who exhausted both of his children's 529 plans and his entire saving. He's now divorced because of it, but he can't not answer the phone. Is that pretty accurate? This is out of pocket.
Self-funding and mom and pop is probably 95% of it.
Would it be beneficial to receive some of the $3 billion in aid of taxpayer dollars that were flowing over to a terrorist, brutal, dictatorial, woman-hating, LGBTQ abusing? I mean, we could go down the list of horribles on the Taliban that our taxpayers that money has to flow through their hands to get to local nonprofits. Would that be helpful to any of your organizations? Please. Yeah.
I think
Long way of asking.
Thank you for saying that, because I think there was a bill that was it was introduced to help with all the funds that have been depleted from many veterans, and I think that one of our biggest choke points that we talk about is humanitarian parole. And, as people were being paroled in, veterans and people started paying $575 for humanitarian parole. And as we stated earlier, it's been systematically denied. And no refund, right? So this is a family of 5 you're talking about. That's a lot of money. And multiple families, it just adds up. And it was a desperate act to get people out. And it was submitted to the USCIS, and then they were denied. So I think talking about funding is important.
And if I could just have one more, Mr. Chairman, would anyone agree or would everyone disagree with Acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Newland's statement that the State Department has no evidence of our former allies being systematically targeted or hunted?
Chairman, we disagree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, Mr. Waltz. And that was something I brought up heavily in my opening remarks. I mean, to hear that stated from the State Department that they're not tracking evidence of these reprisals, and there's case after case, vivid examples of what's taking place, really one of the most astounding things to hear said. I want to go to Mr. Nunn next, and then we'll be going to Mr. Rice after that.
Thank you, Mr. Mast, and thank you, Mr. Crow, for leading this. I hope that in our next one we have the opportunity to have the CARES team in front of us as well to talk about what they're doing at the State Department or lack of doing. Look, I think that we all recognize this. You're seeing a number of servicemen and women around this table who have been on the front line for the last 2 decades. Of that time, we spent $2 trillion. We lost 2,467 of our brothers and sisters over there and 70,000 Afghanistans. We went through 4 presidents. This is no individual. This is a systemic failure. And I will say, of my multiple combat tours over there, the most fulfilling opportunity I had was as a civilian getting those folks out.
I want to thank Tom and Joe specifically here. We work with Task Force Argo. I want to specifically say to No One Left Behind and Moral Compass, you have been long leaders in this, and to each of you, well, you are but a small reflection of the literally tens of hundreds of Americans out there who stood watch on their signal chat for night after night helping evacuate folks. The reality is, after Afghanistan fell, after Corporal Deegan Page from my district lost his life defending the last flight out of Afghanistan, it was people like you who made sure that our allies and fellow Americans made it home. I think to the tune together, we got 4 aircraft out of Mazar Sharif in those last days, 3,000 Americans and our allies processed through Qatar, and like my colleagues here, many of them found their way home. They were better vetted through voluntary forces than through our own State Department. It's a compliment to each of you. At the same time, it's a sad reflection on the state of affairs today. Now, I understand fully that the Taliban is a horrific regime. But in our case, we were able to get aircraft out of country. There are still pathways there to get our allies, the spouses who remain, the 20-plus Catholic nuns who left their seat on those aircraft so that others could get out, that are still somewhere in Afghanistan today, likely slave brides to someone in the Taliban regime. I want to be very specific here. Let's talk about, Colonel Sapp, you were first man on the ground. I was there roughly 20 years ago as well. Do we have more influence with the Taliban today or 20 years ago than where we are after the amount of time, blood, and treasure that we've invested in this event?
Well, I'll just thank you for your question, Representative. I'll start. I started viewing the Taliban in about 1995 when they rose to power. I was a summer only, they call it, at the CIA, and so I was around an analyst. So I recall the sort of burgeoning of the Taliban. They're coming to power, and then of course when 9/11 happened, the invasion that I was part of and so forth, it was, we quickly overthrew the Taliban. We quickly gained control through a variety of means. Some of it was just, by the lightning speed of our victory and so forth. But now I see it, the U.S. had kind of turned its back on Afghanistan in the 90s. That's very clear. I can't say how much influence we had over the Taliban then, but I can tell you now, it doesn't seem to be that much in my view. Now,
in fact, I think we're in a more difficult position. Would you not agree? Trying to evacuate friends that we would have 20 years ago potentially had more influence in the region.
It's certainly a horribly complex process that's very difficult. In our case, now I have a smaller cohort of people than some of these organizations do that Badger 6 is responsible for. But they're both in Afghanistan, they're scattered in other Central Asian countries, including Pakistan and Uzbekistan. And it's most difficult in Afghanistan, but I also want to highlight the fact that it's not necessarily easy in the other countries.
Right.
And the common thread here is the opacity of the process and the lack of efficiency. So in our case, SIV is its own problem, and it's been highlighted. But in our case, most of our folks are P1 refugee referrals. And so there's a lot of reasons why our guys fall into that category. But the bottom line is that process is like just a nebulous mass. You ask for input and feedback on the status of cases, and it just goes into a black hole. You get nothing.
Understood.
And so from my point of view, the opaqueness of the system, just getting answers would be a good start.
Colonel, the State Department tells us there's no terrorism going on, no torture going on. Here's the message that I have as well from my colleagues still in the area. 2 of our Afghan friends, back of a trunk. We know where this is going to end tonight. Along with Task Force Argo and the other groups that are doing this, I want to just say right now, do you have any estimate, based on your handlers, your outreach, how many Afghan allies, family members, children have been killed by the Taliban in the time that you've been working this case?
Across our delegation, we estimate more than 5,000, which is much, much lower than.
And that's what we
reports.
know. I would finally agree. And then, Amy, I just want to ask you very briefly here, the SIV process at State Department, the things that we can do to improve it. Talk about chief of mission denials for us.
I'm going to, Andy.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Historically, chief of mission approval is only around 38% of our applicants. So for every applicant that applies, really only about 4 in 10 end up receiving chief of mission approval. Some of those make sense. They're specious applications. I don't begrudge the Afghans that are trying to get out. They submit, specious SAV applications. Some of them, however, are confounded by very real systemic issues. Our Afghan allies were instructed by the State Department to burn documents that would have proved their connection to the U.S. mission. That was, as the Taliban was taking over, the thought being that if they were caught with them, they would be reprised against, which is accurate. But now it is a matter of how do we prove that nexus to the U.S. mission and chief of mission approval. The State Department and DOD has it's Project Rabbit. It's now called, that we've DAS-T. It's gone through a number of iterations. So there are mechanisms by which they're trying to improve it, but fundamentally, we have put all of this on the SAV applicants themselves. They have to prove their connection through HR verification and letter of recommendation. Incredibly difficult when you're moving from house to house. You may have lost contact with the service members that you served alongside. You may have lost contact with the contractors that now no longer exist that could be able to prove it. And so there are some very serious systemic barriers to entry that unfortunately result in many good people that were very patriotic allies being denied the opportunity to receive chief of mission approval.
Tom, and then I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you, sir.
I would just like to say that there's no crosstalk between various organizations here. Like our guys in particular, we're talking about a program strength that maxed out 300. 7 have been killed at least in the past 2.5 years. But these guys were extraordinarily vetted to the point like polygraphs, some stuff that probably would not be even constitutional here. And each single recommender for the letters of recommendation are coming from Green Berets and EOD guys who all have like top secret security clearances. So there needs to be, they need to work with us in terms of like accepting who's actually, like looking into who's recommending these people.
Yeah.
It's not just some grandmother who stumbled into this crisis.
Knew somebody, found them on their LinkedIn page. These are
Exactly.
individuals who are special operations forces who worked with other operators in the area, vouching for them, who probably in several cases, like our interpreter, saved our lives.
Exactly. So we can streamline this process if they actually just kind of, listen to us and look at our bona fides.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nunn, Mr. Issa, and then Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think it's a coincidence that basically virtually everyone who's asking you questions is a veteran. I wasn't in Afghanistan at the start. I was in Bahrain when we started the bombing. And over these 20-plus years, I've seen a lot of mistakes, but I'm also a student of history. I was honored to write the bill that undid the Rescission Act of 1946, where after we left the Philippines, and most of those scouts were dead who had fought next to us and promised as Americans that they would be treated equally, we handed over a few $1 million to a corrupt government and washed our hands of them for over half a century. So I'm going to be honest, it ain't new. But there are a lot of things you've given us today, and I just want to make sure that we get them down so we work on them. The first one is the black hole comment that was just made. If you've got a black hole, the one thing that each of us know individually and the committee knows as a whole, you've sent something in, an unreasonable period of time has gone by, send it to us. There's a piece of paper you sign, or it's a little complex on how we make sure that we transferred to Congress the right to act, and we will send a letter. And I think the chairman may want to send it on behalf of the whole subcommittee, or the chairman and ranking member, or any one of us individually can send it. And as a man that represents Camp Pendleton, it's amazing how good a deal I get in response from most agencies. So pick any of us, pick all of us. We're here for that reason. I do want to ask a fairly broad question, and I will say that I love the words bipartisan, bicameral, by God, if we just all hold our hands, we're gonna make this happen. History has shown that if something doesn't work with a 2-pound hammer, you got to get a bigger hammer. So the question I have for each of you is, what is it we need to do different in this body to increase the size of the hammer to expedite some of this? We certainly can, in fact, provide, and probably on a bipartisan, bicameral basis, an exemption that says that that any one of these individuals needing housing, transition, et cetera, is in front of the line of everybody else that just showed up at our border. And that means that instead of 2 million people getting ahead, and then they're saying they don't have the resources. So both now and for the record, and then I'll quit talking, please, some of the things you gave us today, give them back to us as action plans, because nothing will happen if we simply hold another hearing. The State Department is not here listening to this hearing saying, my God, each one of these things has to be done. And that doesn't mean they're bad, it means they're bureaucrats. So, we're not going to pass a rescission act. We're not going to do the dastardly things that have been done to people who fought next to us in the past. But we're going to have to pass things or push using the power of the purse and the threat of a denial. So besides the black hole, besides we don't have the resources when in fact we're putting millions of people ahead of them, what else should we be putting down for the record and working together to do?
So I think obviously I talked before about we need more SIVs. Fundamentally, that's something Congress has to do, is to authorize more visas. But outside of that, I think there are bills that have already been introduced that have strong shall language, not just may language, but I think kind of expanding on that. If we want to increase it, a shall third country processing for U.S. RAP claims for our vulnerable P1s and P2s, shall authorize virtual interviews unless there's a compelling national security reason not to.
But with the SIV, is that what you really need, or what you really need is the ability to get a yes to parole in process? I mean, right now, millions of people come over the border. The president's giving them a parole, letting them go to work, and they won't even be adjudicated for years. When we look at those who have made a prima facie case, they've substantially shown that there's likely a connection. Everything else could be done under the same basis under the law. So the question is, do you really want more slots, or do you want them to be treated, at least the people who can show they did aid and assist us, be treated at least as well as people who show up at our border from Venezuela?
Conditional parole for chief of mission approved SIVs, or for others that can demonstrate, a close nexus to the U.S. mission that are known, I think all of us would support. Okay. I don't want to speak for everyone, but we would certainly support. Mr.
Chairman, I'm not going to take any more time other than say, if I had my choice of the number one piece of legislation that would come out of it, it would be that. Does the administration have that authority? If they do not have that authority, I think they have the authority. They're doing it for over 1 million people a year right now, without a chief of mission reviewing it. But if they claim they don't have the authority, legislation that would guarantee them the authority and, as was said earlier, the shall process.
Outstanding, Mr. Issa.
Yield back.
As always, I never expect anything less. That's the truth. I say that in every bit of seriousness. We have a couple minutes before votes. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll do a couple of closing statements. Mr. Mills is... Yep. So I want to, I think people consider it common wisdom stateside that we say time is our friend. But this isn't a normal situation, so I'd ask for a candid assessment. And this is time their friend or their executioner?
I would say it's absolutely their executioner. We have one specific anecdote where a guy, he left the NMRG program in 2015. Taliban came back and burned him alive in 2019. It's not going to get any better.
I think I can speak for all of us, and we'd say we would love to not receive the images we receive every day on our phones. We would love for the urgency, the true urgency of this to be addressed.
The survey we sent out was entitled Death by Delay, so I think that answers your question.
I think the same here. We have over 120 pages of documented atrocities in our report, and we can send more. We just put some together for this, and it became a long statement. But I think also looking at the multiple pathways, the legal pathways, and remember that these were our allies that we fought beside for 20 years, and putting that priority in our mind that we need to support our allies. We need to be an ally to them.
I think you said the right word. Urgency to me looks like a true respect for the life and death situation that people are facing. Urgency to me looks like, and I'm by no means saying that the withdrawal was adequately or appropriately or really even planned for in any kind of substantial way. But on the ground, in the days leading up to no Americans present in an official government capacity, there was an urgency, right? I mean, somebody's going to be working at 9 a.m., somebody's going to be working at 9 p.m., somebody's going to be working at lunch, they're going to be working at midnight, because it is on the clock. These people are on the clock. Time is their executioner, and it should be an expectation of every one of us that State Department be treating this with that level of urgency until the mission is accomplished. That's what we are all service members, as Mr. Issa pointed out. We are all service members. We operate until the mission is accomplished. And this is operating until it's time to knock off for dinner, and we'll think about the mission alongside a bunch of other things tomorrow or next week or after the holiday. And the situation is owed infinitely more urgency than that. I'd ask this question. Can you all say, do you have counterparts, British counterparts, some other allies that you could juxtapose what you are having to do to what the British are having to do for resettlement, or are they not facing the same issue like that as all, or any other ally? Do any of you all have an example for that?
I do. We have General Z with us, and his family is still in India. But other families that went to Australia or Canada, they brought their whole family together, and we're not prioritizing bringing these families together. So I think that's an urgency that we need to address, and we deal with that all the time when other countries are doing this or other countries are doing that. I think we need to apply the same sense of urgency to do what is right.
Please, Mr. Sapp.
Congressman, thank you for the question. So this is my anecdotal experience as a member of Badger 6, but you know, I had foreign military officers from a NATO country come to me in the, you know, kind of early on in September and relay to me how they had taken care of their people to get them out. So it was not so much an indictment, but a little bit of like, hey, this is what we've done in spite of things. So that's the first kind of impression I received from a foreign officer, NATO member actually, who had served in Afghanistan for many years himself. But more of like systemically, I think our problem is that we were actually in Badger 6 searching for other pathways to other countries because of this seeming intransigence or this sort of lack of efficiency. Whether it was Portugal or Brazil, we were just searching for these other pathways just to get these folks out of Afghanistan because, in our view, the system just wasn't working. And so it was this in extremis situation. The clock's ticking. Every day our guys are on the ground, guys and their families are on the ground. More of a chance that they're going to be identified by the Taliban and persecuted. And so that's how we were just kind of desperate, searching for other pathways, and we actually went and looked at foreign pathways as well.
I have one more. I have a number of questions, but I have one more question that I'm going to ask, and then we'll do some closing in this. As a member of Congress, myself and all my colleagues, we speak to an endless amount of people on issues across the board, but whenever I'm home, I can identify easily the two most common things that are said to me. And the two most common things are, number one, they certainly don't mean present company, but how do you deal with those people up there in Washington? It's the number one thing that's said to me on a daily basis. And, you know, the number two question is always, are you having fun? And I always tell them it's the wrong thing to ask because, like the military, fun is not its objective. It's very serious. You can have fun doing it, but it's very serious. And I just use that to anecdotally say, what are you all speaking to these individuals on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? What are those most common threads like that you know? What are these things that people are saying to you every single time? That common thread that when you speak to somebody, these are the words that are coming out of their mouth each and every time. What is that?
Ma'am, do you have any news? Do you have any updates for me?
Please, my family is sick. We're in a safe house, and we don't know what to do.
Brother, please help.
My wife is pregnant and can't get help for our unborn child.
Please help.
Please help, we're starving.
And honestly, primarily, we don't want to die.
I have no doubt that those are the most common things you are hearing. I want to thank you all for speaking to us today, sharing what you're experiencing. I'll start with you all. Do you have any closing remarks that you want to give us to wrap? And then I'll give it to my colleague, Mr. Crow here. Any of my other colleagues have any closing remarks that you want to offer, by all means. We'll take that, and I'll close it out after that. But if you have anything you'd like to say in closing, the floor is yours.
First, thank you for this time today, for us to all come and speak to you. This is very important to our entire community. And again, I'm not a veteran, but for American citizens, this is important too. They should be listening. Many of them are listening, but those who aren't should be. From across the Federation's perspective, I would just like to emphasize that we are here to talk about Afghanistan, but again, looking forward, moving forward, it's not only about Afghanistan. It is about our ability to operate in 178 countries across the world where our military is present and be able to engage with people that we need to be able to trust, and they need to be able to trust us. And will they be able to do that? And then secondarily, for all the veterans at the table, to understand what they're feeling and what this has done to our veteran community. It has absolutely ravaged the veteran community. They are hurting because of this, and helping Afghans helping our partners, helping our Afghan partners does help our veterans. Please help them heal.
So we're tired. I'm not supposed to be here. I was head of med school before this whole thing kicked off. Not a humanitarian at all by any means, but here I am all the same. So nice to get some help.
Mr. Crow?
Thank you, Chairman Mast, for calling this really important panel and bringing to light the continued issues that we all have to deal with. Thank you to my colleagues, veterans who share common cause and actually addressing and resolving this issue, and to the panelists as well for doing so much. I know how much you all have put on the line, your wealth, your time, your health, and I'm grateful for that. And the audience members as well. There are people who weren't able to speak today in the audience who are doing the same, doing so much, and I appreciate that. I do want to say, though, that one of the things that I've realized in Congress is to pay less attention to what somebody says and more attention to what they do, and more attention to their votes, right? Because there's a lot of people sometimes will lob criticisms and then not vote for certain things that can resolve those criticisms. And because of the separation of powers, the administration can't spend money without Congress, and they can't make the laws. And the Constitution delegates to Congress the primary authority for creating our immigration laws. Right? So there's a lot of things that the administration can do, don't get me wrong. And I continue to push them. I continue to look for reform opportunities. I will criticize them when they merit criticism. That is my job. But there are bills that address these things. We heard, a number of folks today, and I'm talking about some of my colleagues, talk about standing by our allies. One of the themes was we got to send a message that we'll stand by our allies. Well, we have a bill for that, right? Standing by the Ukrainians, for example, who are fighting right now and dying, and that is important. We can vote for that. About helping the evacuated Afghans, 130,000 that evacuated that need to be able to work, have homes, start their life. There's a bill for that. That would fix it. We heard about streamlining the process, making it more efficient. There's a bill for that. And by the way, I know you all know this. There's a bill for that would fix it. The State Department, in fact, came to Congress multiple times and has told us we need more money, we need more resources, we need to streamline, but we can't spend money without you approving it, and we can't make certain streamlining without a legal change. There are bills for those things. And I implore my colleagues to co-sponsor those bills and sign on, because we can take a role in fixing it. More resources for processing. There's a bill for that too, in the appropriations process. Learning the lessons of some of our failures. We have the Afghanistan War Commission. Well, there's an opportunity to vote for funding for that War Commission so we can learn lessons and prevent this from happening again. There are many opportunities to vote and to support these things that you all have highlighted, that you are desperately in need of. So it's our obligation to give you all what you need to fulfill your obligation, and I implore my colleagues to join in the effort to get that done. Thank you.
Any other closing statements by any other members of this panel?
Yeah, I want to say something.
By all means, Mr. Crane is recognized.
Just to, on the back of that, I'm on the Homeland Security Committee. We just worked on impeaching Secretary Mayorkas last night. Not something any of us ever wanted to do. But we've been hearing a lot of the same things. We just need more resources so we can process more people into the country. That's not often the answer here, okay? Often the answer is policy, a little common sense. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to you guys, all right? This is on this administration, all right? And I don't care what excuses are made, but this is on this administration. And there's a lot of, I talked a second ago about one of the reasons I don't trust this government, this administration. I said we don't even take care of our own people. How much money have we spent in Ukraine? And I know that's probably not the most popular topic here at this table in foreign affairs, but Americans are watching, and they feel like they're left behind, just like our allies overseas right now. They don't feel like anybody cares. And so I just wanted to push back on what was said right now. Thanks.
Anything else? I'm going to close by saying this. This committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, has had a focus on looking at the withdrawal from Afghanistan, trying to learn from what took place in the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And a lot of people ask the question, why? And sometimes people come to the answer to say, to make sure something like that never happens again. And when somebody says that, it can be hard to imagine that literal statement. America is attacked. We are in numerous times. We are in war for 20 plus years. There's a disastrous withdrawal, and we want to make sure that that literal scenario never takes place again. Some people think of it in that way. I think of it in a slightly different way. Believing that the withdrawal was a success takes a willful ignorance, in my opinion. And to learn from the mistakes of that, it's not just important to make sure that this never happens again. It's important to look at, because if you believe that it was a success, that is the cover-up for what is taking place in this moment. If you believe that is a success, it was a success, that is the rug to sweep under anything that is ongoing right now. If it was a success, then what you are speaking about does not exist. If it was a success, then what you're saying is a lie. If it was a success, then what you're bringing forward is not to be believed. To me, that is one of the most important reasons for our continued and what will continue our oversight of the withdrawal of Afghanistan, because this has not ended. It is ongoing, and you all are proof of the ongoing mission taking place each and every day. I thank everybody for their questions. I thank you all for your responses, for your witness, and for your work. And this roundtable, I suppose, stands adjourned.